Hello and welcome to today's webinar, How to Simplify Database Management and Make Open Source Database Adoption a Reality with Nutanix Database Service. Thanks so much for joining us. This event is presented in partnership with our friends over at Nutanix. Before we get started, there's just a few things that you should know about today's webinar. My name is David Davis of Actual Tech Media, and I'll be serving as the host of the webinar. We've got a great discussion, a really cool demo lined up for you on the event today. So make sure that you stay tuned for that. I do want to call your attention there to the questions pane in the audience console. Many of you have already said hello and good afternoon from across the United States and around the world. We love to see that. I see folks like Matt, Rakesh, Daniel, Eric, Ben, Rod, Reg, Courtney, Quentin, and more out there. Thank you for all the greetings and salutations. We do appreciate that. We also want your technical questions about the topic of the event today, and we encourage those. So keep those questions coming during the event. I also want to call your attention there to the Handouts tab. That's where you'll find two special links, one to the Nutanix Database Service test drive, where you can try out this solution for yourself, and another one to the Nutanix Database Service product page, where you can find out full product details. So make sure that you check those out. At the end of the webinar, I'll be announcing the winner of the Visa $300 gift card prize on the live event today. If you're watching this on demand, of course, that drawing would have already occurred. The prize terms and conditions can be found there in the Handouts tab. All right, with that housekeeping information out of the way, it's now time to welcome today's two expert presenters. Welcome to Jeff Kelly, Senior Product Marketing Manager at Nutanix, and Chris Kingdon, Database as a Service Solution Specialist, also from Nutanix. Jeff and Chris, it's great to have you on the event today. I'll first hand it off to you, Jeff. Take it away.
Hey everyone, thanks for coming to today's webinar. As mentioned, I'm Jeff Kelly, Senior Product Marketing Manager for Nutanix Database Service, and we're going to talk about simplifying database management and making open source database adoption a reality. Quick agenda, we'll cover some database market trends, then we'll move on to some of the top challenges we're seeing among database users. Then we'll introduce Nutanix Database Service, and finally, we will take questions. So let's get right to it. So database market trends, what's happening out there? Well, I probably don't need to tell you this, but as you know, most applications use a database. Many applications use more than one database, particularly if you're using a microservices architecture, in which case every microservice may have its own database. As a result, we're seeing organizations running more and more databases, sometimes up into the thousands. So database deployments are getting much larger. Another interesting trend is that application frameworks are now determining the database engine. What I mean by that is, if you're building, for example, a WordPress application, you're probably going to use MySQL. This is very different from the old days when organizations would often standardize on a single proprietary database, and that was the only database option available for developers. Today, we're seeing developers have the clout to use the databases they want to use, and we're seeing a lot of new applications are being built on open source databases, such as Postgres, MongoDB, MySQL. But of course, the majority of applications still do use those proprietary databases, like Oracle and SQL Server. And the result of that is organizations are using multiple database engines across their organization, which makes management of those databases that much more challenging. And of course, we're seeing the increasing importance that developer and database administrator time is spent wisely. These are very experienced, very talented and individuals in high demand, and of course, you want to make the most of their time. And the result of all of these trends is that we're seeing an increased adoption of database as a service. Now, if we take a look at the database as a service landscape, there's a few different categories of products and vendors out there. So of course, you've got your cloud vendor database as a service. So these are the big, public cloud providers. Most of those services support multiple databases, which is a good thing. However, they only run on their particular cloud, so you're limited to a single cloud when you're using one of the mega cloud providers' database as a service. Then we have the database vendors themselves have created a number of database as a service offerings. Now, the good thing here is these often work across multiple clouds. However, they usually only support that database vendor's database. So you're only getting support for a single database with that database as a service. Now, there are a handful of smaller players that are dabbling with multi-cloud database as a service, where they support both multiple databases as well as multiple public clouds. If you take a closer look, you'll find most of them focused on open source databases and don't support some of the commercial proprietary databases. And as we mentioned, we're seeing a lot of organizations are running both these days. And finally, hybrid multi-cloud database as a service, which is where Nutanix plays. This is where the database as a service works both on premises as well as co-location facilities and one or more public clouds. And it supports multiple databases. So what are we seeing in terms of customer database challenges here at Nutanix? Well, I'd say this extends beyond just Nutanix customers to pretty much all organizations when it comes to databases. Developers are slowed down. They have to often rely on others to access databases, perhaps filing tickets, and then waiting sometimes days, could be weeks for a database, which of course makes it hard to innovate and release software quickly, which is the goal of many organizations today, building software in that kind of modern development framework. It also drives shadow IT, where developers, instead of waiting for databases, they'll just go out and download their own open source database or use some cloud database on their own. And now IT has no idea about this. And when it comes time to support that in production, you could have some challenges. Of course, DBAs are overloaded. When we think about the number of databases that are out there, and the number of databases that DBAs are being asked to manage, they are stretched thin. There's just so many databases, and the variety, as we talked about, is just adding to the challenge. So we're seeing DBAs struggling, just to keep things running on a day-to-day basis, don't have a lot of time for other activities. And of course, database expenses are skyrocketing. Proprietary databases are expensive. The challenge, of course, migrating to open source databases can be challenging. But nevertheless, those expenses are real and they're growing. Now, when we think about or talk to our customers specifically, sort of double-clicking into some of those issues we just talked about, we're hearing 5 real key areas come up time and time again. Number one, they're asking for help reducing the time and complexity of running their databases at scale. They're also asking for us to help them meet business requirements across all aspects of their database operations. Made more challenging, of course, with the larger scale of your database deployment. They're looking to centralize their databases for both proprietary as well as open source databases, relational, non-relational, rather than having to work across silos. They want to empower developers to fast-track adoption of open source databases without bothering those overloaded DBAs that we talked about a moment ago. And they want all of this while retaining full control of their database servers and standards. And so when you really kind of boil this down, what our customers are asking for is help running databases in the most cost-effective environment that meets their business requirements for a set of applications in a region at a given consumption level. All right, I'm going to turn things over to Chris now, who's going to talk a little bit about Nutanix Database Service and how we can help with open source databases.
Thank you for that, Jeff. So I'll introduce the Nutanix Database Service and I'll go into a little bit more detail around the technical aspects of the solution. I love to use an analogy. So when we're talking about building a database as service, or we're looking to adopt new technologies such as Postgres or potentially MongoDB or the like, I use the analogy of an iceberg. And I think we're all aware of this, but we often forget that there's more kind of that meets the eye with regards to an iceberg, and there's a lot more below the surface. When we're looking at building a new solution or an offering to consume this in a very simple way, there's a lot of things we need to take care of. And a lot of customers will automate certain processes with scripts, but when they start to add more capabilities or potentially start offering multiple engines, this becomes very challenging very quickly. And we often find that people just abort these projects or just kind of offer a very limited capability. What we do is we take care of all the technical aspects of this. So from a single solution, we can run all of these database engines using one single platform that can scale across private cloud, public cloud, or any hosted location on the same platform. If we start adding additional capabilities to managing our databases, we start having this abstraction layer for doing a lot of the time-consuming, manual, potentially very error-prone activities that consume a DBA's time, as well as kind of causing them a lot of risk in their day jobs. So around provisioning of simple databases, highly available constructs across multiple clusters, giving the ability to scale those. Patching and upgrades is massive. I think one of the highest risks we see for DBAs is having to manage the upgrades of platforms and the database engines themselves. It takes a lot of time, potentially has to be done on a long weekend, taking them away from their families and the like. When we're starting to look at things from a developer perspective, cloning is a really key area here. Being able to clone a database very quickly with a very, very low overhead. We use a concept called 0-byte cloning, which we can go into more detail in the future if anyone wants to contact us about that. We can start offering self-service for database copies, so a developer can get access to databases very quickly. Native data protection within the system gives us the ability to provision a database, and we're protecting that from day zero. So there's no worries about having to worry about it after the fact. And also we can restore data within minutes, not hours to days. Everything we do within the database service is API driven. So although we have a UI and a CLI, everything we actually do is an API first approach. So what this actually means is we have this full extensibility for a customer to create their own API service layer. So whether they want to integrate into other application stacks, a developer wants to build this into their kind of CI/CD pipelines, provide the self-service or a chargeback model, or whatever you want to do, we can do that through our APIs. And the idea is we're not magicians. None of this kind of technical aspect goes away, but we worry about how that is done, so you can worry about how you deliver that back to the organization as a service. I like to talk to people around this, and I think this sort of model looks very similar, maybe in different tweaks here and there within organizations. So when a developer wants to request a database or request a clone, they often go to the database team. Obviously, they have their priorities. It could take hours, days, weeks, and it's very unpredictable. Obviously, it then goes to the infrastructure team, so on, so on, so on. If one of these teams suddenly has a P1 event, all new requests have to halt. So you're potentially something that took like maybe 2 days, your previous request may take weeks or months. And the reality is a developer can't work like that. It really slows down that agility, especially when you've got your own timelines. So what we do is we move this to simplifying it through automation, having one central platform, one central process, one team can manage this. So we're really changing the way that that team can service the developers in this regard. Over time, because I mentioned everything was API driven, you can start exposing different capabilities so it's a fully automated process. So you don't even have like any human interaction in the middle of this. So potentially we could start with maybe the ability to clone or refresh a database to a developer. They've got full access rights to do that. And then over time, we may want to expose provisioning of certain database engines. So we're really giving this cloud-like capability across all of these engines, Oracle, SQL, obviously Postgres, Mongo, and so on, to really kind of change the way that we're serving the database environment to the developers, and obviously catering for our existing environment as well. Going back to what Jeff mentioned around what customers are asking, relating to those kind of key areas, this is how we're really catering for those customers. So when they're looking to reduce this kind of risk of running a lot of these databases, we can do that at scale. We're running thousands of databases with the same platform, same processes. Looking at meeting those business requirements across scale for all of these requirements is always challenging. And that's where we come in, having that performance, because we've got this platform that can scale linearly with performance, and we can maintain those deployments are done to a secure standard of your kind of design at that cost point, and provide that HA capability across multiple clusters. We're not going to just be able to offer open source databases. We can actually run your traditional proprietary databases, as well as having the same experience through the same platform, same tool sets for all of your database requirements here. And this is where we're really starting to empower a DBA to service and empower the developers in turn. So the developers can actually do what they need to do without even needing to bother the DBA. As Jeff mentioned, the DBA is a very valuable resource. So if we can free them up to do more consulting back to the business, or maybe fine-tuning those applications, whilst the developer is getting everything they need from this, that's a kind of perfect mix. The key thing around this is we give you the control. So we don't dictate to you how you should have your kind of security standards. You can actually provide all the versioning, all the configuration elements that you need to your environment, and then we use that as a blueprint. So we ensure that that is deployed to that standard every time. So you're maintaining that control while giving you this kind of cloud-like experience. Look into a bit more detail around how we do this. Because we're able to consistently deploy those databases to that standard, we're really giving that kind of governance and best practice to lower that risk, because you're in full control of it. And leveraging a lot of automation really helps speed things up, but also a computer is very good, obviously, making a yes-no decision, whereas a human can potentially have a lot of errors in this process. So offsetting a lot of things to automation really helps eliminate all of these things that are kind of high risk. When we're obviously providing this efficiency, that kind of provides this cost effectiveness. So we're enabling the DBAs to focus on the things they actually enjoy, which is obviously consulting back to the business and kind of like looking after those new, fun, exciting projects. When we're looking at the business side of things and ensuring that we do this and meet all these requirements at scale, I think security is probably the number one there. I think when we're talking around ensuring these standards, because we've got these templates that we use and we standardize everything and we ensure that it's done through automation, it's deployed to the same every time. We can provide encryption within the platform, and that's enforced. So you can choose to have encryption enabled, and then that is done as soon as we're deployed. We're not having to worry if somebody does or doesn't do it. You can ensure that that happens across the board. We're not just able to provision, I mentioned earlier that we can provide highly available database clusters. So we could actually provision, for instance, a Postgres HA using Petroni across 2 different clusters with multiple different nodes. So we can actually do that in one single workflow, as well as just doing obviously a single instance for you to test on. So we can do all of these across all of these respective engines. Being able to maintain that performance is key, and we deploy the database to the best practice as per the vendor specification, and also how that aligns to the best performance on our platform. So there's no decision making that somebody needs to make. That's all done natively within the platform. We mentioned around the scalability. The idea of this platform is it's a distributed system, so we can scale this very, very simply, elegantly, with fractional consumption. And obviously all of these things help to lower costs. So when we're starting to look to stand up something for Postgres, if we wanted to have this platform, we can do this very quickly so you can start focusing on the applications and the services that we're designing. When we're looking, obviously, I mentioned this earlier, we're not just having to run one single silo. We're not reintroducing a new silo for somebody to manage, which obviously just further burdens the entire IT department. We're bringing this all together under a single platform. So now we have the infrastructure team, DBAs, developers, security, all talking together and working as a unit to offer all of these database engines. And when we're offering a service, we're not having to worry about how do we offer Postgres if it's running on a different platform. What's the kind of like service experience if we can offer certain capabilities? Everything is kind of unified across this platform. Looking at the developer side of things, we obviously can do this for self-service. It's entirely up to the organization how much they want to expose through self-service, but there is a capability there for you to expose as much or as little as you want. So a developer can get everything that they need from the platform when we're talking about speed and consistency. And what we're seeing is a lot of organizations are starting to try and employ developers that have database skills to try and get around this. What if we could offer you a platform that caters for those database skills so you can focus on getting the developers to focus on the development and the things that they're obviously very good at, and integrating into their platforms. So things like obviously Kubernetes and Terraform, having operators to be able to request a database directly from Kubernetes really simplifies their day job. When we were looking around the full control, just to kind of give a visual around this, traditionally we have a lot of these platforms where you build them yourself. Therefore, you have a high level of control over these. However, because they're kind of like this DIY approach, or it's potentially like leveraging more legacy technologies, there's not a lot of automation that goes into this. When we look at the potential cloud database as a service, it takes advantage of a lot of automation. That's obviously why a lot of people go to those platforms. But you're not necessarily given the control you need. You're given a certain level of access to the database, and that's it. You can't necessarily choose the granular versions, all the potential components that go within that. You can't choose the operating system. You don't have access to the operating system. So that kind of has a trade-off where we find customers maybe 70% of their workload can maybe fit within this, but there's a big kind of core 30%, which is quite a lot when you look at the massive estate that people have that cannot suit these environments. And this is where we come in, because we offer this high level of automation and the high level of control to give you that kind of full customizability. I'll pass over to Jeff to take over from here.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris. So as Chris pointed out, there are a lot of great benefits to Nutanix Database Service, but ultimately, what does that mean? What are the outcomes that we're seeing with our customers? And as you can see on the screen, we've seen some pretty dramatic outcomes. We've seen an average of 97% increase in speed of database deployments using NDB. Of course, that's going to help with innovation and helping your developers be more productive. We've seen a 60% decreased storage requirements for copies and backup. And that's obviously a good thing from the infrastructure point of view. And in terms of overall ROI, based on a study by Forrester Research, found that our customers are achieving a 291% 3-year return on investment and a 6-month payback. So some pretty dramatic outcomes using Nutanix Database Service. All right. That's it for our presentation. We encourage everybody to check out Nutanix Database Service. You could take a test drive at the address on your screen. You can also reach out directly to us, and we'll happily follow up and love to talk to you about NDB.
Great presentation, Jeff and Chris. Really appreciate that. I learned a lot. I know the audience did as well. We got a lot of great questions coming in. Maybe just time for a few of those here, and we'll have to get back to the rest electronically. But first question I wanted to ask you, I think this one is probably for you, Jeff, and that is, they're saying we have about 50 databases, and they want to know, is NDB only for really large database deployments?
No, certainly Nutanix Database Service is very valuable for large database deployments, but even with 50 databases, Nutanix Database Service can be extremely effective. Certainly when you've got a smaller DBA team, NDB can really be a help in terms of automating some of the operational administration functions we talked about and helping developers be more productive.
Excellent. And let's see. Here's another good one for you, Chris. Maybe they want to know. You mentioned that Nutanix offers full PostgreSQL support. What does full support for PostgreSQL entail?
Yeah, great question, actually. So when we're running Postgres that's deployed using Nutanix Database Service, we will support that end to end. So you can call us for anything you need around that, whether you're experiencing configuration issues, whether you're having performance issues, whether there's potentially bugs. We will obviously look into everything. If there's anything that we need to fix, we will contribute things back to the community as well. That's kind of part of one of our beliefs at Nutanix is obviously if we're leveraging open source, we contribute back. So it's basically we're a one-stop shop for everything.
Nice. Very nice. That could help a lot of companies out there. I know, being that kind of one-stop shop to make things easier. I'm afraid we're running out of time here to answer the remainder of the questions live. Final question, though, I want to ask you, Jeff, and that is, what should people do to get started with this solution?
Well, you could reach out. If you're a current Nutanix customer, certainly reach out to your sales rep. If you're not a current Nutanix customer, you can reach out to us. We'll get back to you right away. We'd love to have a conversation with you about Nutanix Database Service. You can also take a test drive and see Nutanix Database Service in action for yourself.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you, Chris. Thank you, Jeff. Really great presentation today. And of course, thank you to our friends over at Nutanix for supporting us on the webinar. I encourage everyone to try out that QR code right there or the link on the screen. Check out the test drive for yourself. See this in action. And with that, it's now time for our final prize announcement. The winner of today's Visa $300 gift card is Edward Byrne from West Virginia. Congratulations. We'll reach out to Edward Byrne, and we appreciate everyone who joined us on the webinar today. We hope that you learned a lot. We hope that you will check out the Nutanix Database Service test drive. There's a link right there in your audience console, or just visit Nutanix.com for more information. Have a great day, and we'll see you on the next event. Take care. Bye-bye.